Hi, welcome to Comics Layout and Pacing. This is a re-recording of a presentation that I did earlier at the Millennium Library here in Winnipeg. Big thank you to the Winnipeg Public Library for hosting that event. And this is brought to you by the Prairie Comics Festival, of which I am one of the organizers. So that is a free-to-attend indie comic event happening on September 23rd and 24th at the West End Cultural Center here in Winnipeg. Yeah, I'm going to be there. We're going to have lots of other indie comic creators there as well to show off and sell their comics and zines and graphic novels and artwork. Yeah, it's going to be a great event. And I also want to showcase our awesome poster illustration at the bottom here. You can see an excerpt. I'll show the full poster at the end of the presentation. And this was illustrated by Jonathan Dick. So this is going to be a fairly informal presentation. I'm just going to be going through my slides and talking and gesturing at the screen with my mouse to point out anything that I feel is relevant. So hi, I'm Scott. I made these comics and graphic novels. They are of varying lengths and formats and styles of pacing, and I'm going to be talking about the work that I put into to make these books with regards to layout and pacing, and some different techniques that I used and some things that I learned along the way. In particular, I'm going to be talking about Arcland, this one here, mostly because it's my longest comic project to date, and in that regard, it just has a lot of different types of pacing and layout that I put into that, trying different techniques, and I learned a lot from doing this book. So, layout and pacing. What do we mean by that? Right off the top, layout, we're generally talking about the composition of panels on a page, the shape of those panels, the size, the number of panels per page, and general kind of layout of artwork within those panels, and as well as word balloons and text use within those panels. And how our eye is moving through the page as we read, where we are looking at first and reading through the story, and as a creator trying to guide the reader through those panels in a natural way, and trying to avoid confusion when it comes to reading from panel to panel, from page to page. Pacing, we're mostly talking about time, how time moves from panel to panel, from page to page. Between two panels or a series of panels, is it a couple of seconds? Is it showing an action in minute detail, almost like it's happening in slow motion? Or between a couple panels, is it the span of minutes or years or decades? Yeah, those types of decisions are all important ones when it comes to writing your story and planning your story, and deciding how slowly or quickly it moves from scene to scene and within each scene. I'm going to be talking about panels and panel composition a lot, and also the gutter. If you don't know, the gutter is the space between the panels. It is the negative space there, and the margins around the panels. So every great presentation starts with highlighting someone else's presentation, and I want to just showcase this awesome talk by Kathleen Gross, who is actually one of our exhibitors at this year's Prairie Comics Festival. She did this awesome talk also about comics layout for the Vancouver Comic Arts Festival. Yeah, highly recommend checking this out. I'm going to be talking about some similar things that she's talking about in this video. Obviously, we cover a bit of different ground there, but definitely recommend checking that out for yeah, another look at this same topic. So let's get into types of layout. These examples that I'm going to be showing over the next couple slides are not the only types of layout. There are so many types. You could argue there are infinite types of layout that you could imagine. But these are just some different techniques generally and styles to consider. But what you do in your own comic and how you choose to compose your pages is totally up to you, and you can be as rigid or as creative as you want. So here we've got an example from Dave McKean from his graphic novel Cages, and this is a fairly rudimentary rigid layout. It's just a 3x3 grid of fairly straight rectangular panels. They're all the same size, and it's the same number of panels per page. And this is, yeah, fairly simple use of layout. But this is effective in the way that it does not distract from the reading process, and the sequence of reading left to right, top to bottom, moving from panel to panel is fairly straightforward. And this type of layout is smartly used just to let the artwork and the dialogue and storytelling fully take center stage. You're not thinking about the layout while you're reading this. You're fully absorbed in the story, so that the layout can purely enhance the visuals and storytelling without distracting from it. Next we have a 2-page spread from the short comic Tinder by Rhael McGregor, who is also one of our exhibitors at this year's Prairie Comics Festival. I want to talk about both of these pages. This is a 2-page spread, but I want to talk about these pages separately. On the left here we have probably the most common style of layout. It's a style that I use most frequently, and you will probably see most frequently in a lot of modern comics. Not this specific layout or arrangement, but in the general sense that we have straight rectangular panels that are of varying size and shape to enhance moments of storytelling in different ways. We've got 2 fairly square panels at the top here that showcase 2 different kind of parts of the same kind of sequence, and then a larger wide panel in the middle here to really highlight the main sort of moment and feeling of this scene as a whole, and then another wide but slightly shorter panel at the bottom. But then moving over to the right side here, we've got a different layout here that's adding a little extra flourish into the style of the gutter on these pages. This kind of fluid ribbon-like line moving between the panels gives it an extra quality, gives it makes it feel separate than the page we just came from, and gives it a bit of a dreamlike quality, or like this is a memory or something imagined. But still, this doesn't distract too much from the art and storytelling. It enhances it in a nice, subtle way, and does not overly confuse the reading process, mostly due to the number of panels and arrangement of panels. We're still reading these one at a time from top to bottom. It's still very clear the reading order and where the panels are divided. It adds just a little extra flourish. Now, that's not to say that a style like this, or some of the styles I'll be talking about in the next few pages, in the next few slides, that's not to say that this is better or more creative than the page on the left here, or these pages here. It all depends what kind of story you're making, and deciding your layout to effectively tell your story in the way that works for you. Next, we've got an example by Elaine M. Will from her graphic novel Look Straight Ahead, who is also one of our exhibitors at this year's Prairie Comics Festival. This page, I think, is really, really unique in the sense that these panels are less so like windows or frames into a scene, and in here trying to feel like they are scraps of paper taped on top of the page in a really interesting way, but also in a way that is not distracting from the reading process. We still have panels that are, still mostly rectangular in a rigid grid, in the way that we still know the reading order, left to right, top to bottom. This gives it a little extra flourish and enhances the feeling of, this is a character that is maybe trying to hold themselves together or recollect something. This gives it a little extra edge, on a little extra flavor on top of the artwork and dialogue that maybe we wouldn't get if this was just regular rigid panels. And I do want to point out in particular this cutout that I have at the side here, that is this panel in the middle here. And Elaine has very smartly put this piece of tape here drawn on the side on this edge. Same with this piece of tape over here. On these edges here, rather than putting that, say, on the top and bottom panels, because that would confuse the reading order. And here she's done it in a way that actually enhances the reading order quite nicely, where the direction that the tape and the order in which the tape is connected to each panel informs the direction you're supposed to read, rather than confusing it. If that piece of tape was put on the top and bottom, yeah, it would confuse things a little bit, but here it doesn't, and in fact enhances the correct reading order. Next, we have an example from Courtney Loberg and their graphic novel and webcomic, We Don't Go Through the Angelgrass. So this is a graphic novel as well as a webcomic you can read for free on Webtoons, I believe. And this is another example of more creative, kind of fluid layout. We've got these panels here where the gutter really kind of blends into the artwork itself, and blends into the word balloons even from panel to panel. It's hard to even quite tell where one panel ends and the next one begins, but it's still not really confusing to read. I think that's mostly due to the number of panels per page. Here we've only got 3 panels, and here there's only 2. And the read order is fairly clear where you're moving from text to text, from image to image. But here again, like in the example with Rhael McGregor, this gives it an extra dreamlike quality where scenes are blending into one another, and this feels like some sort of dreamlike or ethereal place. On this page here on the right, you can see the clouds of the landscape on the bottom panel blending right in with that gutter, and also blending in with the word balloon in the panel above it, in a really interesting way, where time kind of feels like it's fluid and things are happening at a strange pace. But again, in a way that is not overly confusing, and you can still read this very clearly and tell that this is a separate scene from this scene. Next, we have another page spread from the same graphic novel, We Don't Go Through the Angelgrass. And I want to highlight in particular this page on the right here, where the gutter kind of forms the shape almost like the peak of a roof, in a way that is really interesting, because this bottom panel is kind of an interior shot, and the shape of this gutter just very smartly but still subtly kind of enhances that feeling of this interior space. Courtney could have easily done this 3-panel spread with the gutter just going straight across and these 3 panels being fairly rectangular, and it would read in the exact same order and mostly look the same in terms of artwork. But this is a really interesting choice in a way that enhances the feeling of this panel without being overly distracting or taking center stage from the artwork and text. So we've talked about types of layout, and again, those aren't the only types of layout. These are just examples that I found particularly interesting, and I highly recommend you looking at all types of comics for how they do layout and exploring creative ways that you think work for your own comic. But now we'll move into types of pacing, and these are kind of the only types of pacing. There is absolutely wiggle room between these, and the definition between type of pacing 1 and 2 blurs the lines therein, absolutely, but how time moves and how you choose to arrange your scenes within a comic will probably fit into one of these categories. So it is, I think, very important to know these types of categories, so that, yeah, you can make those decisions more accurately. This is from a book called Making Comics by my friend and yours, Scott McCloud. Scott McCloud is an amazing creator and an amazing resource from his books, both Making Comics as well as Understanding Comics. And he did a third book as well called Reinventing Comics. Making Comics and Understanding Comics are two really great resources. They have a bit of overlap between their books. Making Comics is more from the perspective of the creator, and Understanding Comics is more from the perspective of the reader. But they're both incredible, and I highly recommend you checking out those books. So here, from Making Comics specifically, he has highlighted the 6 types of pacing. Moment to moment, like a action is happening in slow motion. He's shown here an eye blinking, and you actually have panels in between the eye opening and closing and showing that in minute detail. Really highlighting a particular moment or small details or gestures within a moment, and not just the beginning and end of an action. Next we have action to action, which is largely the beginning and end of an action, and this is probably the most common type, and it's the most common type that I use for sure. It is very good at just showing real-time events progressing in a way that doesn't take up too much space or too much time on the reader's side to understand. Yeah, it is cause and effect. It is an action and reaction. Here he's shown someone swinging a baseball bat across 3 panels, but this could also easily just be 2 panels holding the bat back and then swinging it forward. Subject to subject is, think of it like 2 characters in conversation, like he's shown here, and the camera is jumping between those characters. It is a similar, it is maybe a similar pacing in terms of time to action, but yeah, think of it like jumping between different camera angles within a single moment. Time is still progressing in a fairly sort of real-time sense, but yeah, we're moving around the scene and moving between parts of that. Scene to scene is larger jumps of time. This could be from locations or between spaces of time, so it could be an interior of a house, and then the next panel we're in the park across the street, or it could be an interior of a house, and then the next panel is 10 years later or an hour later, and we see how that house has changed. Yeah, it is larger jumps of time or space. Aspect to aspect, I think of kind of similarly to subject, but maybe in a more abstract way, in a way that you're not as clear how time is progressing, but it is like camera angles moving around a scene to show something maybe less narratively structured and more something to enhance atmosphere and mood within an environment. So here, Scott McCloud has shown a person's face lying in the grass. We've got a sun overhead and some birds and clouds. It feels like we're in the same space and we're zooming into particular details through that scene. And lastly, basically once you've exhausted all your other options and there's nothing else left, you've got the non sequitur. It is a slice of pizza, an Abraham Lincoln, and a car. It is kind of the only option left. Not often used in comics, but it's there, and yeah, do with that what you will. Here's a closer look at some examples that Scott McCloud has illustrated to show those types of pacing in closer detail. I'll let you pause the screen and look at these at your own pace, but here we've got moment to moment, action to action, scene to scene, subject to subject, aspect to aspect, and the non sequitur. So now I'm going to talk about using some of those types of pacing in my own artwork. This is from Arcland, and this is an example of moment to moment where this dream sequence is kind of slowly dissolving and then transitions into this drip falling on the main character's head before she wakes up in this ruined structure that she's been camping out in. I really like moment to moment pacing to slow down the pace of a book and really let the environments or characters or details be absorbed a little easier, and yeah, really trying to highlight the mood of a space and your story rather than just trying to efficiently relay the plot. I could have easily started this sequence, this page in particular, with just this establishing shot of her waking up, and there's drips falling from the ceiling, but I really wanted to show this slow moment to capture that feeling of slowly waking up and also the slowness and slight dreariness of this environment. Next, we've got this action sequence, also from Arcland, that is a pretty clear example of action-to-action pacing. Here we've got swords clashing and the spear swinging, and she's dodging, and this alien dog thing bites her spear, and the spear is dropped, and they run off. So this is fairly typical action-to-action. But I do want to highlight these two panels here on the right side at the top. This is actually maybe more accurately a small moment of moment-to-moment pacing. And I want to highlight this because moment-to-moment isn't only for slowing down the pacing and showing something more nuanced or contemplative. It can be used to clarify things even when you want to keep up a good pace and keep things feeling like they're progressing and keeping up the action and speed of the sequence. So here I wanted to particularly highlight this alien dog thing biting this warrior's spear and taking it out of her hand. Specifically, I wanted to show this not only to reinforce how they finally escape by this warrior losing their spear, but also this comes up later in the story where this warrior confronts them and she says, "Hey, your alien dog thing bit my spear," and it's kind of a thing. And so I wanted to highlight there as a moment of specificity. Again, I could have shown this as only one panel, but I decided to break it up into two panels, zooming into this shot to clarify this moment and reinforce it as maybe an important detail, while still not taking up a ton of space and time. At the end here, I also could say that this last shot is more subject to subject, zooming in on her face as they run away. So yeah, mixing up types of pacing within a single sequence, within a single page, is great and can be used effectively. Yeah, just tools in your tool belt for you to think about when you're planning your own comic. So we've talked about types of pacing, we've talked about types of layout. Now I want to move on to the actual creation process. And something that I like to do when starting a new comic is setting rules. This is not rules that I have decided that you should follow. These are rules that I have made for myself for each project, and each project I've given different rules. And so this is a technique I like to do. If this sounds like a good process for you, this is about you setting your own rules for your own project to best suit your own comic. Then I will talk about breaking them with purpose and diverting from your own rules to create small, meaningful moments in a subtle way with your layout and pacing that can really enhance your story in key moments. So for Arcland, the rules that I decided were only rectangular panels, no full bleed panels, and full bleed panels are panels where the artwork spills out of the edge of the panel and goes right to the edge of the page. I'll show some examples of that in a little bit. So I didn't want that. I wanted everything contained within the margins for Arcland. Only angled panels to show action and tension. So most of the book is fairly rigid rectangular panels like this, but in action scenes or in scenes where I wanted there to be feelings of tension, I wanted to show that with angled panels or angled gutters. Only angle panels 7 degrees, and this was just something through experimenting on my own that I decided was a good idea, keeping the angle of these panels consistent, and ensuring that I don't overdo it. If suddenly the gutter was at a harsh 45-degree angle, it might look kind of jarring, it might be distracting, and it might also be confusing on the order to read things. So 7 degrees, just through my own experimentation, felt about right, and so I kept that consistent across the book whenever I used angled panels. Maximum of 6 panels per page, and again, just through my own experimentation, I decided that was a good number, that I could have fewer, but no more than 6 panels per page, so that I didn't overcrowd those pages. And if most of my pages were 3, 4, 5, 6 panels per page, and then suddenly I get to a page where suddenly I've got 10 panels on a page without distinct reason for that, it might seem kind of jarring and out of place, so I wanted to keep that kind of consistent. And lastly, more on the art side of things, not so on the layout side of things, physical things have black outlines and fluid things have colored outlines. And what I mean by that is I decided on this art style where all the characters and physical objects have black outlines, and anything more atmospheric or fluid has colored outlines, like the sparks coming off of their sword here, the sound effects, the swooshing of the swords here, any sort of like action lines or surprise lines, smoke, anything like that. I wanted to have colored outlines. Oh yeah, you can see the exhaust from the robot friend here. To make those feel less physical and more kind of ethereal, like they're sitting on top of the artwork and on a different plane. And again, that was just something that I wanted for this book, and I decided felt good for the style of this book. Before moving on, actually, I'll just talk about breaking them with purpose. In the case of Arcland, I didn't actually break these rules in terms of layout. I kept that very consistent across the whole book, mostly because I never felt a big reason to break those rules. Arcland is a fairly lighthearted, cozy adventure story, and so I never felt a reason to break those rules, and so I just kept that consistent across the whole book. And I'll get into examples where I did break those rules in the next slides. With my comic strip Okasamoso, this was a comic strip that was in the University of Winnipeg student newspaper. For this strip, I decided only square panels, only 4 panels per strip. Each strip only has 1 scene. And again, more on the artwork side of things, I wanted to have photographic backgrounds and then more, and then hand-illustrated characters and some objects as well. These rules were mostly due to the constraints of the newspaper itself. I only had so much space every week to put my comic strip in, so that's the space I had to work with. But decisions like only square panels, only 4 panels per strip, that was something that I decided on my own. One week I could have done 5 slightly narrower panels or 3 slightly wider panels that still fit within the same space. But I felt it suited the overall story better and was less distracting, kept things consistent, to just always keep this 4 square panels for every strip. However, getting into breaking your rules with purpose, I did break this rule on the last issue. This issue breaks the rule of only square panels, of only 4 panels per strip, and also the rule of only one scene per strip. And the main reason for this is because for this last issue, there wasn't a comic strip above mine that would have taken up that physical space on the newspaper. So I lucked out with this, and I thought this is a great opportunity. Since this is the last issue of Okosomoso, I thought I'll do something a little extra special, and particularly with this last panel here. I could have still done this as 2 square panels, but I thought as the last panel of this series, I'll have this as an extra wide landscape shot to really have a nice send-off for this character. Again, I lucked out with this last issue of Okosomoso that it also coincided with having extra space in the newspaper, but this was also breaking those rules with purpose, since this is the last issue. I wanted it to feel a little extra special. Next, I'll be talking about my comic series Romulus and Remus. This was actually the first comic I ever made. Issue 1 came out 11 years ago, I believe, and issue 2 came out 10 years ago. This is from issue 2. And so for this series, for both issues, I decided only rectangular panels, so no angled panels. Maximum of 9 panels per page. Black outlines and shadows. Again, more on the artwork side of things. Black outlines and shadows. And then fluid things are photographs or painted more realistically. So again, similar to my rules with Arcland, I wanted characters and objects and environments to be outlined in black and have stark black shadows, but then more fluid things like smoke, fire, atmospheric effects like that. I actually tried collaging digital photos, as well as trying to paint them more realistically so that they seem kind of different from the rest of the artwork. Here I did allow myself to have full bleed panels when I felt appropriate, so you can see here where the panel spills right to the edge of the page, and even in some cases where the details within the panel, like these pipes here, escape the borders of the panels and go right to the edge of the page, or sound effects like this slightly coming out of the page, coming out of the panel like that. I allowed myself to do that as I felt like I wanted to, pretty freely, but I didn't want any angled panels. However, I did break that rule quite purposefully twice. Once in issue 1. So this story is about this fallen angel character descending in this chasm and trying to escape. So this page here is kind of the right before the action is really about to take off, and he's descending deeper into the chasm at the beginning of issue 1. And so I decided I'm going to break my rule about angled panels and try them out here in actually quite a severe angle, to really really showcase that descent as the angles are going down, and have an extra feeling of kind of uneasiness or off-kilterness as we're leading into the action. Nothing has, in an action sense, nothing dramatic has happened yet, but this gives a feeling that something is about to happen without explicitly expressing it. And then I broke that rule again in issue 2 for the same but kind of opposite reason. This is as he's making his escape from the chasm for the first time since the beginning of the first issue, and he's making his ascent back out of the chasm, and so I have those angled panels now going up rather than going down, but still with a kind of a sense of uneasiness of, is it really over yet, as he makes his ascent out. Alright, so I've talked about setting rules for your own book, rules that I set for myself for my own books. So next we'll get into the actual creation process. All my comics and graphic novels just start with random scribblings, random notes. I have a bunch of different notebooks and sketchbooks where I will just jot down my random ideas. And, that can be a character's name, it can be an object, it can be a place, it could be a particular plot point. a location, a color that I really want to use for this reason or another. Um, any of those random details, I'll just jot down in my notebooks as I feel inspired by them. And eventually, one day I'll decide, you know what, I think this idea is starting to come together, or a series of ideas. You know what, I'm thinking of taking this handful of ideas and merging them together in a single story. And I will decide, I think this is going to be my next project. And then I will make a madness wall. I love the madness wall. You love the madness wall too. This is a process that I really like. It is kind of daunting, but it is very kind of fluid and creative in a fun way, and a way where I can get off my computer, where I do most of my other work and artwork. Um, so I will take all those notes, all those random ideas and scribbles jotted down in notebooks and sketchbook, and I will reproduce those onto post-it notes, and I will start putting them on the madness wall. Usually those will start off just kind of randomly placed on the wall with no particular order. But little by little, I will start sorting it out. I will decide, oh, okay, this event can happen here, or this is where this character gets introduced, or this object of interest, oh, this is a good spot to put that in. And I will start plotting it out in a very kind of fluid way like that. Um, it's important to note that this is not necessarily a chronological timeline of events in your story. This is a chronological order of your book, because you can absolutely write a story where events happen out of order. There are flashbacks. We jump between characters. Things don't need to happen chronologically, but your book will be chronological in the sense that your reader will be reading page 1, 2, 3, and so on. And so you can have a section here where this is a flashback, or we jump back to this other perspective, or whatever. But this line here is the basically the order of scenes or order of chapters in your comic. So once I've done that, I will try to make things a little more coherent than the madness wall. Once I felt like that the order of this is starting to make sense in a fairly in a fairly distinct way, that this is the beginning, middle, and end of the book. And from there, I will try to distill that into a more coherent list of scenes or chapters of, just point form list of events of how they occur. Again, not necessarily chronologically, but chronologically in terms of scene order of the book itself. And then I will start thumbnailing. So this process is done. I like to do very, very small. What you see here are my thumbnails that are only about 1.5 inches high. I will print out sheets just on 8.5 by 11 paper of page spreads, just the border of the page spread, so that I don't accidentally erase them, and then I will start thumbnailing over top of them in pencil, again, so that if I erase details, I'm not erasing the edge of the pages. And I might just start with that list of scenes, just with blank thumbnails, start putting down, okay, this first 3 pages is, where this scene happens, and then the next 5 pages, this is where this happens. That will almost definitely change once you start drawing things in, but it's a good way to just start blocking things out in a general sense of, this is roughly how long I imagine this scene taking up. Again, allow yourself wiggle room and allow yourself to make changes, because that will absolutely change once you start actually penciling in the panels and characters as those scenes. You'll realize, oh, this actually isn't 3 pages, this is better as 2 pages, or this 5 pages should be 10 pages now. You will start making those decisions as you start drawing things in. But the reason I like to do these very, very small, so that I'm not focusing on details. I'm not focusing on making nice artwork in any sense. This is just about hammering down that story as efficiently as I can. It is just rectangles for panels and stick figures for characters, and maybe some notes on the side of bits of dialogue or clarification of what event is happening in a particular panel or page. One thing that I highly recommend if you are going to thumbnail in this way is laying things out in 2-page spreads. I'm going to be talking more about this, but a 2-page spread has a very important relationship. Yes, you are reading 1 page at a time, one panel at a time, but you are looking at 2 pages at the same time, even though you're reading them one at a time. Those 2 pages have a relationship, and I think it's really important to think about your layout in terms of page spreads, not as individual pages, because that's what your reader is going to be looking at. They're going to be opening a book to a page spread, and that's going to have a certain vibe. If this page order suddenly gets shuffled up, and this page here is now on the left, and this page over here that's on the next spread is now the page on the right, and so this, in essence, this page and this page is a 2-page spread, that's going to have a very different feeling and have a different kind of vibe than how this feels or how this feels. And so thinking about that ahead of time and trying as best you can to stay true to those vibes that you're planning out, I think is really important. In the case of webcomics, this may not apply as much. In a webtoon style comic where pages are just kind of stacked on top of one another, reading one panel at a time, reading your way down like that, won't take on this type of layout. However, if you ever think that one day that webcomic, you'd like to see it in print in a format kind of like this, I highly recommend you trying to storyboard or thumbnail your book like this ahead of time, because it will absolutely be easier to lay out your book like this and take it apart rather than having your book laid out like a webcomic, like a webtoon style comic, and trying to put it back together. In the example of Courtney Loberg's comic, We Don't Go Through the Angelgrass, this is a webcomic first. This is on Webtoons before it's available in print, and so the first time that people are reading this, it is just panels stacked on top of one another, reading your way down like that before anyone sees it in this kind of format. However, I know that they illustrate their pages as full pages first for that very reason, that this is already good to go for a printed book, and like I was saying, it is always going to be easier to try to pull this apart into individual panels rather than starting with individual panels and trying to put it back together in a coherent way. So now I want to focus in on this middle spread here as I jump to the next slide, because that, to the finished artwork, translates kind of like this. And I chose this spread in particular mostly because this is probably my closest example of my thumbnails translating pretty directly to the finished artwork. I definitely have some thumbnails, like you can see on the right side here. These last few panels are just empty, mostly because I probably thought to myself, you know what, I can imagine what's going in there. I don't need to draw that out, or maybe I hadn't quite decided yet, but I know this is the end of a sequence here. I believe this is actually a chapter break, so I know that's the end of a sequence here, and whatever final moments I want to have on this page, I know I can probably fit within these 4 panels, or however I decide to arrange this in the end. So that's fine. Again, this is about trying to hammer down your story as quickly as possible and not focusing on the details. But in the case of this spread, I think this did translate pretty closely in the end, with a few exceptions. Obviously, when you're moving from artwork that is only 1.5 inches high to something that is I think this final artwork is illustrated at about 15 inches high, you're going to notice some differences, and you're going to try some things a little differently. Maybe you feel like some things can be a little more efficient or a little clearer or drawn from a slightly different angle. Yeah, you're obviously going to be making those decisions. In particular, you can see this panel here where the angle of the hand has changed slightly. Again, small decisions like that. Probably the most noticeable change between these panels is this sequence here, where I decided this one large panel at the bottom, I could actually chop that up and add an extra panel on the end there, keeping things a little tighter in this action sequence. It felt like there was a little too much breathing room, and I wanted to keep things feeling kind of tense and tight as she's racing down this alley. And so adding an extra panel felt like it kept that sense of tension and momentum happening, as well as providing an opportunity to add a little extra detail, showing her runaway and this shopkeeper gesturing at their broken basket. Yeah, you're going to be making changes like that as you move from thumbnailing to the finished artwork. So that is how I like to thumbnail for very action-heavy sequences. And I kind of thumbnail two distinct ways. You can find the method that works for you. But I like to do it two distinct ways, whether I know if a sequence is going to be more action-heavy or it's going to be more dialogue-heavy. So this is how I like to thumbnail for a scene that I know is more about the dialogue than it is about the visuals. This chapter is mostly about this conversation, and so to thumbnail this, I actually start with a script. I will just, in a fairly regular way, just write down dialogue and maybe a few little notes of facial expressions or gestures or any other kind of visual details that might be happening in the scene. But it is just a fairly regular script of the conversation that I imagine taking place. I will look it over, I will do a little bit of editing, and once I feel like it's in a pretty good place, I will break up that script into word balloons. Again, before I've done any artwork at all, I will break up that script into word balloons. I'm not going to get too much into lettering here, but I like to think of word balloons kind of as a form of grammar on its own, so trying to break up my dialogue in a way that I feel works well for each piece of information, each statement, whether I want to have a larger word balloon where there's more information or have a more isolated word balloon to really highlight a single reaction or a single statement and give that a little more weight by having that its own word balloon. Yeah, I'm not going to get into that too much. We actually did another presentation by Lyndon Redchenka. You can watch the archive of that presentation on the Prairie Comics Festival Facebook page. Yeah, definitely check that out for a more in-depth look at lettering in comics. But once I've broken up that script into word balloons, then I will start laying it out into pages like this. I'm starting to get a vague idea at this point. I'm imagining what kind of artwork I imagine per panel, whether it's both characters framed in the scene or moments like this where I know this dialogue is maybe going to really zoom in on a character's facial expression, like what's happening over here. Yeah, I'm starting to imagine those decisions, but again, without really committing to any artwork, I'm mostly looking at how the dialogue is flowing from panel to panel, and a big factor is looking at the length of the sequence. After laying out all this dialogue in word balloons and trying to arrange those across panels and pages, I might realize, wow, this conversation is 20 pages long. Maybe that's too long. And then at that point, I will start to reshuffle things. I will start to try to fit word balloons in different orders, or I will go back to my script and I will re-edit it, and I will try to maybe cut out some things that are a little unnecessary, or maybe I'll realize that this conversation is too short and I want it to have a little more impact, and so I'll try to take that opportunity to maybe add some details to the conversation or try to stretch it over more panels and show more artwork, allow more room for artwork. But yeah, that's another important factor, is making sure that there's still room for artwork. It would feel kind of awkward if one of these word balloons was taking up an entire panel and there's really no room for artwork at all. Still want to ensure that there are room for visuals and it doesn't look too awkward or crowded, and it's moving at a decent pace. And then once I've laid that out, I can really start to imagine the artwork that goes into this. And for a sequence that is maybe more focused on dialogue or text rather than visuals, you can start to make separate decisions for what you want those visuals to be. If the text is really carrying the plot forward, then maybe you want to use your artwork to enhance that text. You know, you're both telling and showing an event at the same time. Or maybe if your text is doing all the heavy lifting, you can take this opportunity to use your artwork to showcase some other things. You know, show some details that that can kind of enhance the mood or feeling of the scene in a way that falls more into the background. In this case, yes, this is a long conversation, but I wanted to make it. I wanted to keep it feeling still dynamic and interesting, and so the way that I did that is by just trying to move the camera around as much as I could to keep things feeling dynamic. And also, I like architecture. I like design of environments in that sense, and so moving around this environment allowed me to show off this environment I designed in a way that, yeah, I just liked how that turned out. So we talked about the relationship that a two-page spread has, that those 2 pages that you're looking at simultaneously has a certain feeling, and planning that out can be really important. So with that in mind, one of the biggest tools that you have when thinking about that spread is also the page turn. The page turn is an extremely important factor in a physical book because that page turn can be really effective for certain moments, and it is the main driving force that will keep your readers engaged. You know, always trying to encourage your readers to wonder what's happening next in a big way or in a small way. Always having them eager to turn that page and know what's gonna happen on the next series of panels is something you really want to think about. So this is an example from Arcland that is your pretty textbook example of a page turn. You have the character here on the last panel of this page spread saying "look out," and then you turn the page and this person's getting zapped with a laser beam. It is anticipation, suspense, and then a big surprise. This is your pretty typical page turn surprise. But you don't have to have a big action sequence to use a page turn effectively. Thinking about your page turn in just small ways can be really effective too. Think of it like if this was a conversation happening, and maybe you decide very deliberately, oh, the last panel of this page spread is someone asking a question. Maybe it's a really important question, and then you don't get the answer to that question from the character they're talking to until you turn the page. Trying to keep the reader engaged and always wanting to know what's going to be on the next spread of pages is I think a really important thing to consider when planning. And this is the kind of things that you can prioritize when you're storyboarding. That this is not the sequence that I just showed with that page turn, but you can imagine it here. That page turn was a priority for me. That was number one priority for that sequence. This is a big action moment. I want to have that page turn surprise. So when storyboarding that sequence, I planned that out first and made that number one priority. That okay, I want that page turn to happen here, and then made compromises accordingly so that could fit in there because that was my number one priority. Maybe the series of events that happened before that sequence, I had to condense it, or lengthen a little bit, and similarly on the other side, the series of events in the pages after it, again, making that page turn a priority. So we talk about the page spread as having such an important relationship, and it absolutely does, but the fact still remains you are going to be reading one page at a time, and so the read order from panel to panel is still extremely important within a single page. Sometimes you can think about the read order of a page from panel to panel like a sequence of this is panel 1, this is panel 2, this is panel 3, and so on, and you read it in order like that. And while that's correct, I like to think of things more as a line of how you are looking across the page and how your eye is moving more fluidly through that page as you're going from panel to panel. And thinking about that and trying to enhance your layout and enhance your visuals to better clarify that and allow for a more natural flow through that page. This is an example from my comic Boreal. This was originally printed in the University of Manitoba student newspaper. It is also available free to read online. This is a page I'm particularly proud of because I think I did a pretty good job trying to enhance this flow, and I remember trying to do this as effectively as I could. So we've got the monster here leading to the right and the word balloons trailing to the right, enhancing that flow, reading left to right. But then we come to this spear here and the last word balloon that now directs us kind of at an angle going down and ever so slightly back to the left for this sequence of panels that are all kind of close-ups in different ways and feel pretty clear that you read these in order like this, also all being all the same size. And then we have that spear again pointing down to this panel, and the spear and big swing, big motion line of the spear then leading us back to the left so that we can read these word balloons in the correct order, now going left to right, back to this last panel here, and the spear also pointing down and to the left so that we can read this next panel here, where we have the swing of the spear now leading us back up and to the right towards this panel here, and then down to the last panel, following a motion like the line I have here. Yeah, again, this is a page I'm particularly proud of that I was able to make this work and I think do it fairly effectively. This doesn't always work, you make compromises accordingly. Sometimes the artwork just, is what it is, and, this kind of enhanced reading flow doesn't always work out. But you do what you can, and I think thinking about this, whether or not it's doable for a particular page, is up to you, but still something worth thinking about. This page here, also from Boreal, is an interesting example where I tried something ever so slightly different with that read order and thinking about the flow through the page. With this particular panel right here, this arrow flying across the panel, this middle image here shows if we were just looking at these panels as empty rectangles. This line here shows us kind of how we would read this sequence and how I would move through it, and the line that you would trace through it before you've done any artwork. But since I knew that this hunter here is firing this arrow and this panel here is going to be this arrow flying, I thought for a long time, probably too long, whether I wanted to show this arrow flying to the left or to the right. Showing it flying to the right kind of made most sense initially because, you are reading left to right, and so pointing that arrow to the right enhances the flow of reading. But with this particular layout, I thought, I'm going to try something ever so slightly different and point it to the left, because I can skip a step in the flow of this read order by just having it kind of hint at reading now back to the left, so that you can then just go down to these panels here and then around to the last panels, rather than having this extra kind of snaking motion here. Again, this is all kind of very theoretical talk, but trying to enhance the reading order and give it a little extra clarity and feeling of flow in this particular context. Yeah, this was a small experiment. Not sure if it was totally successful in the end, but I gave it a shot, and it's something that you might want to think about as well. So in Arkland, Arkland is a big journey story. It is about the main character and her companions traveling across many different landscapes and environments. And so to enhance that feeling, I tried to show her as much as possible traveling left to right. Again, enhancing that reading order of reading left to right. I want to show her as much as I could traveling to the right. Here, she's traveling in this boat, and each panel she's traveling to the right. And even in this interior environment, she's moving up the stairs to the right, moving to the right, again, moving towards the right, and trying to show her always progressing towards her goal, or feeling like she's always progressing towards her goal. With the exception of this page right here. This is about halfway through the book, because this sequence here is, she's just been through a lot. There's, a lot has happened in the last couple chapters, and this is the first time she's going home since the beginning of the book. And so I really wanted to emphasize that in kind of a subtle way by showing her now moving back to the left. I've reinforced for so many chapters her moving towards the right, that suddenly flipping that direction, showing her moving back to the left, I really wanted it to feel like she's going back. So this is a particular kind of type of layout, and this is a weird example. This particular arrangement of panels is considered kind of a no-no in the comic creator community. This specific layout of two panels on the left here stacked on top of one another, and then a larger panel on the right that is the full height of those two panels we just came from. This is just generally considered something to avoid, just because it can be confusing. It can just be a way to, kind of put a bit of a speed bump in the reading process, where your readers might be a little confused. Do I read this panel and then down and then over? But if there's information at the top, now I'm kind of going against the grain. Or do I read this panel on the top left and then over to the right and then back down and to the left? Again, kind of going against the grain there, and going against the typical reading order. This is generally considered something to avoid, just because it can be unintentionally confusing and take your readers out of the story because they're distracted by the correct way to read the sequence. Now, however, I also did this, but I want to talk about this because I drew this actually before I knew this was some sort of taboo, so I didn't know this was something to avoid. But I also think I did a fairly decent job, if I may say so. So I want to talk about the stuff that I put into it, and also in a general sense, just talk about there are no right and wrong ways to do these things, even when things are considered poor form or kind of no-nos. There are creative ways to do anything, and so I think just realizing that that exists and deciding for yourself whether it's something you want to try or not. So in the case of this particular page, I think I did an okay job with it. We've got these first two panels here that you read first, and then the panel on the right. So we're starting off with this first taller panel here. It shows this elevator moving up. We are supposed to read down from there, but still a very strong vertical movement of that panel kind of informs us to read down more than to read to the side. I also have this sign here that says pawn with an arrow directly pointing down to the next panel. So then moving down to this panel here, we have the main character moving through a door and the beginning of a sound effect, create, that actually finishes off on the next page, eek, to kind of inform that the direction that you're supposed to read that, create, eek, and also showing her entering the doorway and then or opening the door and then entering the doorway on the next page, roughly in the same location where we left off with the last panel. That I think enhances that well. And also just kind of overall that we have this strong color shift from this interior space that is a more lime green from this kind of colder, more grayish green of those first two panels. Lastly, I also just want to point out the strong diagonals here, that to finish off this panel, this is a right-hand page, so this is the last page of a page spread. So I wanted to enhance this page with these strong diagonals here that are now leading your eye up and to the right to finish off this page, so that when you turn the page, your eye is now in the top left to start off that new page in the top left corner. Next, I'm going to actually be talking about some film techniques. And this is called the 180-degree system, or shot reverse shot. This is a very common technique in film. And the reason I'm talking about this is because film and comics do have a lot in common. They're ways of telling stories visually. And you are going to be thinking about panel layout and panel, the artwork that you have in each panel, similarly to how you would frame a shot in film. So this technique is another way to help enhance clarity and avoid confusion within a scene. If you can imagine two characters in conversation and then you draw a line across those characters, you want to keep the perspective of your points of view, of your camera angles on one side of that line, so that you can see on the bottom here, character A is kind of always shown on the left side of the frame, facing to the right, and character B is shown on the right side of the frame, always facing the left. Even when we zoom in closer, they're still kind of in the right corner and the left corner, facing the correct direction, so that even when we can't see the other character in frame, we still get the sense that they're facing towards them and facing the correct direction. So here's an example where I used that technique in Arkland. This is a conversation between that warrior and the main character, and you can see here they're having a conversation, and I tried to keep those camera angles always from the same side, always showing the warrior on the right, on the left, facing to the right, and the main character on the right, always facing to the left. Even in examples like this last shot here, where we have a more over-the-shoulder angle, again, we're still on that same side rather than her other shoulder that might feel like things are now kind of flipped around. We're still on that same side of that imaginary line we've drawn. There's one exception to this kind of rule with this first panel here, where I actually have the main character facing to the right rather than facing to the left. This is a good way to just kind of illustrate, yes, this is a technique from film, and there's a lot in common between film and comics, but at the end of the day, they are different mediums. For this particular panel here, I felt it was actually less confusing to show her facing the right, facing into the rest of the page, and the rest of the conversation happening, rather than having her face the right, which following the system would be the correct answer, but felt kind of awkward because it felt like she was facing away from the conversation in this instance, especially since it's the first panel of this sequence. So yeah, again, this is a technique to think about, and also thinking about ways in which comics can do it differently. Next, we're going to talk about the establishing shot. Establishing shot is a widely used technique to just show an environment so that you can then zoom into that environment, and we know where we are from that establishing shot. It establishes the location, so then we can focus on the details in that location, and just remember that we're still in that same space. And here's some different ways that you can do that. I like to do kind of these small surprises or small senses of suspense, or maybe even subtle confusion in my establishing shots, because I think that's a fun technique in a way to very subtly kind of keep my readers guessing, and keep things a little more interesting. So here I start with an establishing shot of the skeleton of this large creature that has kind of been turned into this hideout. But then moving down to the panels that are zooming into this scene, we've got this strong color shift, and the background is a little more abstract, and a small moment of maybe intentional confusion where I want the reader to be wondering, oh, this is where we are, and then you go down to these panels, oh wait, where are we? But then you turn the page, and I almost have a second establishing shot on this next page that kind of reconfirms that, oh, we're actually inside of this creature, showing more clear details of the inside of this rib cage, and we see that strong color now informing, oh, that's where the rest of this background comes from. Again, just a small moment of suspense. Wait, where are we? Oh, we're inside it, and having those small kind of suggested moments of maybe intentional confusion to provide something a little more dynamic or interesting. Here's another example of an establishing shot. In this case, I didn't start off this sequence with an establishing shot because, again, kind of inspired by film, I wanted to start with a zoom in, this kind of moment-to-moment sequence to show something a little more detailed and a little more atmospheric of this cricket chirping. But zooming out from this cricket, I wanted to still clearly show that we're in the same space by continuing the chirp, 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 and on this, finally on the establishing shot, the chirp, chirp at the bottom here, to clearly show this is where we're zooming out from, and this is where we started in that first panel. And then on the next page, we're zooming into this hut that is indicated by the windows, but also the same color of the stone here, so that we know that we're in the same environment, but this is now inside, and then moving around this scene to show almost several establishing shots of where we are in this space, in kind of using aspect-to-aspect pacing across these panels. So further talking about clarity and trying to enhance the correct order in which to read panels and trying to avoid confusion. Starting with this page on the right here, this is a page from my comic Romulus and Remus, and this is a sequence where I kind of wanted things to feel intentionally confusing. This is a big moment, and things are starting to feel off-kilter and tense, and so I almost wanted this to feel a little confusing in the sense that moving from the first panel on the left, the word balloon directs us to the panel now in the middle on the bottom, rather than maybe the typical reading order that would be the panel above it. And so to read this page, you're almost suggested to read it in a reverse snaking order, going from this panel and then up and then around and then down. Yeah, I wanted this to feel a little off-kilter and a little different, and like the almost like your head is spinning in the way that the main character might feel. But also thinking about wiggle room and allowing yourself wiggle room so that things can still be generally clear. And with this page in particular, if you read things in that order that I just suggested, or if you read things in, a slightly different order, it still makes sense. It's still fairly clear, the information that we're supposed to get from this page, and trying to allow yourself that wiggle room, trying to, I think, stepping back and looking at your pages and seeing if there's any moments of possible confusion, and trying to intentionally read your page out of the intended order. Is it still, fairly coherent and clear what's happening? I think is something to think about when structuring your pages. This example in the middle here, yet again, I did that forbidden type of layout with these two panels here stacked on top of one another, and then this more vertical panel beside it. But I think I've enhanced kind of the correct reading order with this diagonal line, dividing these two panels here from this panel here, so this kind of feels like a set that you read first and then you read this one. But also talking about wiggle room, if you read this out of order, it's fine. You still get what you're supposed to from this sequence, and it's not that big a deal. It doesn't make it, overly confusing in a way that is really distracting from the story. And lastly, I want to talk about this page on the left here, because this is a sequence where clarity was kind of a priority in planning this out. This is the chase sequence where the character is running through this alley and down these different streets, and moving from panel to panel, I wanted to try to make it as clear as I could where we are moving through this space. So this first panel shows her at the edge of this alley here, and there's this very vertical staircase here in this yellow color that you can see behind her, with the rest of the brick being orange behind her here. So that when we move from this panel and the camera angle has shifted quite dramatically, we still see this very clear staircase here with the same color highlighting it, so that we can still decipher, oh, this is that same staircase, we're just now looking at it from the top rather than from the side. Now moving down to the next panel where she falls off that staircase, again, we've still got the strong color indicating that that's the same staircase, and also the hint of these stairs right on the edge there that I want to make sure to include to inform that that's the staircase that we just came from these panels. We've also got this door frame and these curtains, and these two specific windows here that I wanted to make sure were clearly in frame for the next panels, so that when she tries to hide and she dashes through this curtain, we know that that's the curtain that she goes through because it's got that clear shape and also clear color against the yellow wall. And then moving to the last panels, we've got a strong color shift that she's now inside this doorway, but peeking through the curtain and through the windows, we can see that same yellow color to know that that's the environment that we just came from. We're now on the other side of it. And also these two windows here that are now flipped and on the other side of the doorway, so that we know very clearly this is the same wall, but we're now on the other side of it. And I think that's something to think about, where you really want to make sure that that things are clear across the sequence, if that's something that's really important and you want to ensure that clarity as much as possible. Not thinking about just one factor to inform your readers where we're at, but trying to use multiple factors with color, shape, form, space, camera angles, specific details like the windows, like the staircase, to not just doing one thing, but trying to do multiple things that are clues to indicate this is where we are in the space, and here are multiple clues that suggest that. So now I'm going to be talking a bit about lettering. Again, I'm not going to get into too much detail specifically about lettering, but here's some ways that you can use lettering to help enhance your read order and do lettering in in kind of a creative way. On this first page here, we start off with these two top panels that then going down to this large square panel. I decided to try out this laying out these word balloons so that it kind of snakes around the table, so that moving off of this second panel here, we go down to this word balloon here, and then kind of start to read things in reverse order, kind of going against the grain, so that we read things over and then down and then around the table, finishing it off with this separate word balloon here that is in close proximity to this next panel here, and then read down to finish off this page. Again, kind of going against the grain of how you would typically read left to right. But I think, yeah, this was something I tried, and I think I did it pretty well. And also a case where if you read this out of order, this is the character just listing things off. If you read this out of order, it's fine. You still get the information you need, and it doesn't make things too confusing. This page here from Boreal, I did a similar technique, but kind of for different reasons. I have this middle panel here with these word balloons kind of snaking down, trailing down like that, and I could have arranged these word balloons just kind of stacked on top of the panel in a fairly rigid way, reading left to right. But I decided on doing this kind of more meandering arrangement of word balloons. She's, the main character has just fallen in the snow, and she's trying to catch her breath, and so giving the sense of like it is sort of this trail of smoke, or this, her trying to catch her breath, this feeling of meandering, and maybe even slight intentional confusion, to reinforce that feeling of uneasiness, but also meandering through this scene as she's trying to catch her breath after just running and falling. Transitions. I talked about the page turn as kind of a transition in a sense previously. There's ways where you can very clearly indicate transitions with text. You have a word box that says meanwhile or later, or has a separate location than where we just came from, to very clearly indicate this is somewhere else or in a different time. But there's ways you can do that visually. In this case, we've got a conversation that is broken up with this flashback in the middle here, and again, talking about clarity from those previous pages, trying to do not just one thing, but trying to do multiple techniques, multiple clues to really enforce what you're trying to communicate. This is a different time and place. So not just one thing, but multiple things here. There's a strong color shift. Also, these panels are a lot more vertical than the more horizontal panels that we just came from. And also, these word balloons don't have tails. Again, trying to indicate that this text, this speech, is not coming from this place. I even have on the panel before the flashback the character saying something, and it ends with ... and then the next panel above it beginning with ... like it is continuing that thought into this flashback. Again, trying to do multiple things to help clarify that change of scene. I could have started this flashback on a page turn, thinking about the page turn as a division between a page spread and that page spread having a relationship. But I actually think this works better within the page spread rather than having this on the page turn and then this starts off a new page spread. I almost feel like that would be more confusing. Having this embedded and bookended by the same scene, I think makes things a little clearer in a way that if we turn the page and suddenly we're confronted by these panels here, there might be a momentary bit of confusion where the reader says, oh wait, did I miss a page? Why are we suddenly in this new location? But when it's embedded within the same page spread, that confusion is diminished because we know we didn't miss a page because we're still on the same page spread. And it's clarified again by bookending of the same scene that we are both starting and ending this sequence with. So I've talked a lot about clarity and flow and trying to be efficient in your storytelling. But I do want to highlight that negative space is not wasted space. There is a technique in Japanese known as ma that translates to negative space and is about allowing breathing room into your storytelling and allowing for moments of reflection. Just because something isn't, a sequence isn't moving the plot forward in maybe a significant way or an efficient way, that doesn't mean that it's wasted space. And allowing for those moments, I think, are really important. I want to highlight two videos. This one on the left here, the best moment in Spirited Away is a scene where nothing happens. There's a lot of different videos on this topic. If you just search Studio Ghibli Ma, you'll find lots of different videos about this scene or about other scenes. I like this video in particular because I think it was fairly concise and well edited to help describe this technique. This video here from the YouTube channel Strip Panel Naked, Juxtaposition and the Power of Silence in Comics. Again, talking about using silent panels and moments of negative space or reflection in interesting ways. I also just want to shout out the YouTube channel Strip Panel Naked overall. They put out lots of great videos talking about layout as well, or lettering, or coloring, or all kinds of different techniques in storytelling. Highly recommend checking out that YouTube channel. Very, very concise and well edited videos as well, offering these bite-sized little tips and interesting things of note within comics. Here's an example of trying to use that empty space to show some small reflective moments, trying to show, the more nuanced moments of just soaking in the environment, character development, and moments of reflection as well to let the reader kind of catch their breath and reflect on the events that just happened or the events that are yet to come. Slowing things down is not always a bad thing. Last but not least, I want to just leave with some final words of wisdom, I guess, if I can say that. Fixing late mistakes. And I have mistakes in quotes here because, mistakes is all subjective, and really there's no such thing as mistakes. But, if you finished your book and you realize that there are things you want to improve on, or things that you would have, that looking back on your comic as a whole, things that you'd like to change. And that can be really tricky, especially since, the whole book's done and it's drawn. It's hard to change things at that point. The easiest thing to do is probably add text or dialogue. It might not be the most elegant solution, but it does work in a pinch. Especially if you've done your text digitally and it's not directly written or drawn right onto the page. That can be your easiest way to add a bit of clarity. If you give it a read after it's done, or you get some feedback, and you feel like, oh, this moment is actually a little confusing, or I'm not really sure what happens here. Adding some text to just clarify, more definitively, this is what happens, or this is what you're supposed to understand here, can really help and can be the easy solution there. Again, not the most elegant solution maybe, but it does work. The next thing I would suggest is adding a 2-page spread. This is definitely more work than just adding text, because it would be, doing 2 whole new pages of artwork and text as well. But I suggest 2-page spreads. Sometimes you can add in an extra panel if you can kind of change a bit of your panel order, or squish in an extra panel between other panels. Sometimes you can do that. But adding a 2-page spread can sometimes be your best option to avoid reshuffling your pages. I've talked a lot about the relationship that a page spread has, and if you trying to add a single panel might be really difficult or impossible, and adding a single page might completely reorder your pages and reshuffle those page spreads in a way that is not great, and it completely reorders those page spread relationships and the feeling of those page spreads. So adding a 2-page spread keeps your existing page spreads in the order you've already established, and it's not changing any of that, and you're still able to add a significant amount of space to add some extra clarity. Next, I'd recommend giving it a rest. Take a break if you can. Leave your project and try to come back with it with fresh eyes. Something that I have tried to do over the years, but it can be very difficult, is trying to look at your own work from the perspective of the reader, not the creator. Forcing yourself into an out-of-body experience. It's really hard to kind of take on that perspective, but trying it and trying to look at your own work almost from an objective lens rather than a subjective lens is extremely valuable, and then you can kind of be your own critic in that sense. But extremely hard to do, and takes a lot of practice to see your own work that way. And taking a break from your book where you allow yourself time to almost completely forget about it and then come back to it fresh can be a great way to try to force yourself to look at it that way. And lastly, move on. Don't agonize over a single project, especially after this talk. If you've come away from this presentation and realize, oh dang, I'm halfway through my book or whatever, and Scott said I should be doing this thing, but I did this other thing instead. First of all, don't put that much stock in anything I'm saying, and there's no right or wrong way to do things. Just because I like to do things a certain way doesn't mean that's the only way to do things. Absolutely, that's not the case. The best learning experience that you will have is not trying to agonize over a single project and trying to get it perfect before calling it finished. First of all, there's no such thing as perfect. But it's better to just finish it and reflect on it, like I was just talking about it, and move on to your next project. Or maybe you don't finish it and you leave it behind and then still move on to your next comic, taking what you learned from the previous project. And you will learn more from finishing a project or just moving on to the next one than you will from just agonizing over a single book until you feel like it's perfect. Thank you for listening to this whole presentation. If you've gotten this far, thank you very much. You can find more about my work at scottofortart.com. A lot of the comics that I've talked about here you can read for free on my website or through my Patreon. You can read those as well. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, Patreon, YouTube. If you have more questions or you want to chat about comics, definitely reach out to me through messages on either Instagram or Twitter. Always happy to chat about comics theory, or if you have questions about this presentation in particular. Always happy to chat about that. And on my Patreon, I also do monthly posts about what I'm working on, and those are free to read. You don't have to be subscribed to my Patreon to check those out. Every month I do kind of a detailed breakdown of what I've been working on the previous month. Sometimes that's about plotting comics, sometimes it's about art commissions I'm working on. If you want sort of more detailed look at what I go through each month on various projects, you can check out those posts. And finally, once again, this is brought to you by the Prairie Comics Festival that is happening September 23rd and 24th at the West End Cultural Center. This is that amazing poster illustrated by Jonathan Dick. And we are a non-profit organization, so if you're interested in donating to Prairie Comics Festival, we're always happy for support. You can follow that QR code there. If you're interested in donating, really appreciate any support, big or small. Or if you're interested in volunteering for us, if you're in the Winnipeg area and you want to help something as simple as moving tables and chairs around at the event, or informing people about panels, or more on the back end of things, and the preparation side of things, reaching out to potential sponsors for fundraising, or doing poster stuff, or other kind of help in that regard. Yeah, definitely reach out to us for any type of volunteer work. We're always looking for more people to come on board and help us out. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll talk to you later.